Thank you for being here. It's such a pleasure to be here with you, and I'm so honored and thrilled to be presenting this work and to give you a deep dive of the curatorial conceit and framework of the show, and to also introduce you to some of the featured artists who are here today. Can you raise your hands? We have 4 of the lovely artists here, and I'm so excited to pass it off to them and let them explain their work. So we're going to be starting in the front gallery. So if anybody needs chairs, just raise your hand and a member of staff will bring you a chair. And we have bathrooms in the hallway, so don't feel shy to ask for any accessibility needs. Okay, so let's all gather in the front room. I am so excited to welcome you to our womb room. This is the room that I've been calling From Womb to World, and it's really setting the craft foundations of this iteration of the show. This project began in 2021, and it has traveled to 4 cities so far. It's been in Philadelphia, Boston, Stockholm, Seattle, and now for the first time in the southern United States, here in Houston. And it's a multivalent project. It was a publication published by MIT Press by Michelle Miller-Fisher and Amber Winnick. It was translated into an exhibition format, first at the Center for Art and Architecture in the Mütter Museum in Philadelphia, by those 2 publishers, as well as Juliana Rowan Barton, Zoe Greggs, and Gabriella Nelson. And at each venue that it's traveled to, the curators have asked that we work with a community advisory group that's in each city to make it really regionally specific and relevant. So we hosted community input sessions, we worked with Planned Parenthood Gulf Coast, and we also worked with Mother Tongue magazine, who has an editor based here in Houston. So this show has had so many hands in its making, and so many incredible community connections that have made it what it is. And here at Houston Center for Contemporary Craft, we have really extended the checklist to think about craft's intersection with the topic of motherhood and caregiving. So this room is really where that framework begins, and we are surrounded by objects that may be very familiar to you, like the cuddle-up blanket here. This is a pretty standard, ubiquitous object in every delivery room. But we also have works like this piece by Erin McIntosh, which are riffing off of the traditional quilted baby blanket that may be an heirloom object in your home, but is thinking more about queer identity formation in the South. So we are here thinking about how not only are the materials and traditions of craft some of the first material contact that humans have once they enter the material world, but we're also here to think about how disciplines like craft disciplines, weaving, textile, fiber art, metalsmithing, ceramics, these are all disciplines that require immense community support, intergenerational knowledge transfer, time, labor, attention to material and process. And there's a really beautiful analog between those types of disciplines and caregiving practices like carrying a child, weaning a child, breastfeeding, clothing, and caring for a child. So I would like us to move through the galleries ahead with that lens and that framework in mind, thinking about how something like a cultivated practice of breastfeeding, which requires a lot of honing, a lot of practice, a lot of community support, a lot of lactation experts, could be compared to something like a practice like metalsmithing. So try to keep that framework in mind and hold that as we move through the galleries ahead. I'm going to be giving you a deep dive into a lot of the objects. Please feel free to raise your hand and jump in. I want this to be kind of casual. I want it to be a discussion. This show is really important at this moment in time, and all of the curatorial team, both here and abroad, we have curators in Boston, Stockholm, London, that have all had hands in this show. And We have seen people have new ideas. Designers have sparks for the next prototype of a design that could save someone's life or change their experience with reproductive experience. So be open and please share with me as we go through. So, beginning with this piece, A.L. Mills, this may seem like an ordinary prefabricated kind of mass-produced work, but it's actually a collaboration between craft and industrial production. It was a collaboration between an apron maker in Chicago and a medical production company. A bunch of nurses and midwives in the 1950s said, we need a standard sterile swaddling blanket for hospitals. Can you help us work together and come up with something? So we have the kind of traditional blue and pink stripes denoting the gender binary. And this, you see this all over the TV, every hospital room you've ever been to. And then we also have this piece here by Emerson Croft, which is thinking about the swaddling blanket. Emerson is one of the work study craftspeople at Berea College in Kentucky. And this is woven on an 18th century shock-studdle loom. And it's really thinking about how we can be more expansive about traditionally codified gender binaries. How can we have a more gender-affirming swaddling blanket? So this is part of their Earth Element series. It's all hand naturally dyed from local sources in Kentucky. These two pieces are by Alison Crony Moses. This is from her Black Bodies series. And this work here, My Belly, was commissioned for the original Designing Motherhood exhibition project. Alison is both an incredibly esteemed woodworker, but also a birth worker and community organizer in Boston. She organizes works around Black maternal health and joy, and is really invested in creating spaces for celebration, mourning, and that support better maternal and infant outcomes for Black mothers. So this is called My Babies. This is carved from a single block of wood that she has then split and reformed together to show her two children and how they really become part of your body, extensions of your body. I want to highlight this piece here. The works on this wall are thinking about baby wearing, baby carriers. So we're starting with a work from the original show. This is a Snuggly from the 60s. And this was developed by Anne Moore, who was a Peace Corps volunteer and saw all of these mothers in different countries carrying their children in baby carriers in long swaths of fabric, and thought, why don't we do that here? So she started hand sewing these baby carriers, which became the Snuggly. The first round of them were all hand sewn and fabricated by her and her family. And then it kind of took off and became this major mass-produced ubiquitous object that we all know today. But as we all know, people have been carrying their children for many thousands of years, and that was not invented by Anne Moore. We have this Yakama cradle board from the Pacific Northwest. This is a beautiful example of this. This was passed between 4 generations of mothers in one family. And each time they passed it on to their expectant mother and their family, they add their own fabric or beads, add their own touch to it, so you can see the kind of accretion of layers of history and embodied knowledge and that are passed down through the generations in this piece. Here we have another really incredible work by Gare Jiang. Gare is a Hmong American embroidery artist, and this baby carrier is using his traditional embroidery style, but is telling his story of forced migration and displacement from Vietnam after Vietnam War. And you can see all of the figures who are tending the fields in this kind of narrative embroidery format are now transposed as voids, kind of ghostly figures, to kind of represent that really fraught and traumatic journey. Okay, as we emerge into the next space, we're going to get into some of the other thematic sections of the show. Starting with exam. So here we have examples, historical examples from the Mütter Museum, the College of Physicians of Philadelphia, of two early speculum designs. This is the Pompeii speculum from circa 79 CE, and this is the Lucy Sim speculum. We have a cervix dilation board, which shows the dilation of the cervix up to 10 centimeters, ready for crowning. And then we have a contemporary design object by Nissaker, which is really transposed next to these works, is really thinking about restoring agency and power into a self-exam. So this is meant to be placed between the wearer's two legs, so they're able to give themselves exams and, you know, trying to transform a process that can be traumatic or uncomfortable for many folks into something that feels more comfortable and everyday. We also have this piece by Jen Ricotta, who is both a birth worker, midwife, and a ceramic artist. And she went viral on TikTok for showing how perfectly she can demonstrate a cervix dilation on the wheel in clay. Next to that, we have this wonderful piece by Gabriella Weinsencher. And Gabriella is showing her C-section, including historically accurate cesarean section birthing needles and this incredible ultrasound rendered in glaze on the amphora surface. Right in front of that, we have these works by Kim Hardy from her Birthing Anatomy series. These works are blown glass that are then heat formed and hot worked after they're taken out of the molten fires of 3,000 degrees glass. So these are based on anatomical models, but also AI imagery. This one on the right side is called uterine, and this is a contraction. So you can see how all of those kind of organs and muscles are kind of merging together in that piece. Moving over to midwives, we have the rebozo, which is a Colombian. This one is from the Yucatan. Traditional woven textile. It's very long, and it is a really beautiful bridge between this room here and the exam section, because it is used not only in labor to what is called sift the baby, change the position. So they use the textile to move the maternal back, move the side, cradle around the stomach, and move the baby into their correct position. But it's also used as a baby carrier and has many other uses, blanket as well. So from there, we have a pelvic examination model, which is used by midwives. And many of the early pelvic examination models, which include the placenta, the child, were handmade, and including a famous example by Madame de Coudray, who was an early midwife in France in the 16th century. Her soft sculpture, essentially, which is a mix between a doll and an anatomical model. Some of her pieces actually had human bones in them. They completely transformed the history of midwifery in Europe and saved so many lives, maternal and infant lives, by teaching other midwives how to safely deliver babies. So really intrinsic connection between craft and caregiving and delivery. in that piece. Here we have means of reproduction, which is really thinking about kind of the larger social infrastructures that influence maternity, including maternity leave, and working artist mothers, infertility, and kind of political posters that designed from different countries that are encouraging 2 children or 1 child or safe sex, so that, it's not just on one person, it's 2 people in this. And then we have the early Herbert Bayer menstrual cycle brochure, which is an incredible design object as well. So these 2 works, this piece on the left by Deborah Willis, shows, it's a lithograph showing 3 shots of her pregnant with her child, and it's called I Made Space for a Good Man. And it's a double entendre because she was the head of her department at Philadelphia College of Art, which is now University of the Arts in Philadelphia. And when she became pregnant, she had to leave her position, and the dean of the department said, well, you're gonna have to leave, and we'll be hiring a male professor, unfortunately. And she ended up not only having to leave that position, but then went on to give birth to Hank Willis Thomas, who's a very esteemed artist in his own right. So it's a really interesting double entendre. I made space for a good man. Here in Jennifer Langdachik's One Tough Bitch, this is an incredible photograph where she is overlaying the historical craft mending technique of kitsungi onto her endometrial scars. She's thinking about the process of fertility, how it's not always a straight and circuitous route to fertility. This piece here is by B.A. Harrington, and this work is called Rocker, Rock Her. And B.A. is a trained historical classical furniture maker. She was trained to recreate early American colonial furniture forms, including dowry chests, early women's desks, objects like that. She's worked closely with the Chipstone Foundation and knows how to do all of these really historically accurate recreations. So in all of her research in these types of furniture, she has been thinking and doing research about early American women and the roles that they had in society and in the home, and how the dowry chest in particular is this object that is all of these collapsed social signifiers of women's worth, their value, their role in society. And by merging that with a crib and a rocking chair, you can really see the kind of narrow, socially subscribed roles that women had to play in early America, and perhaps still today. Moving over here into monitoring. When we are embarking on the journey to reproduction, kind of really starting with tracking your monthly menses, to tracking the child's heartbeat, to tracking how many diaper changes and how much sleep they are getting. Monitoring and data collection is a very important part of this journey. So we have the very nostalgic early Fisher-Price monitor, which was one of the first nursery monitors, next to Liz LaFleur's piece from her project called the Queer Birth Project. She's based in Dallas, and this, the parent speaker and the child monitors, as she calls them, are playing softly now, but we'll turn it up once my talk is over. This woven together audio track of all of the interviews with queer families that she's done with her partner Katie Sobering, who's a sociologist at UNT. And they have been interviewing queer families across the country about kinship lineages, how they see family, and how people are forging their own path. They've woven together all of these interview samples, and it has this really undulating, soft, amazing audio track. Right beside it is Sung Lee's The Sleep Blanket. This is a blanket he knitted for his son Calder, and it is showing the first year of his son's sleep data in a blanket, and Calder actually gave us permission to show this work. It's on loan from him. I am very excited to hand over the mic to Sara Hubbs to talk about the entrance to milk.
Thank you, Sarah. I'm so honored to be a part of this show and to be here for this and for the opening, so thank you so much. And thank you all for coming out. So my work, these are called weaning vessels, and they're blown glass. They're actually blown into a mold. They're based on Bronze Age weaning vessels that were made out of clay. And they were made in the image of like little animals, and so they were really like the early bottles. So I wanted to make some like that, and I wanted to make them out of glass. And my process, I source different shapes to create these plaster molds that I then blow glass into. I'm making gestures now. So the basis for these are all like plastic materials that come into your life when you become a parent. So like the plastic toy packaging, like, if you have like a doll, say like a Barbie, and there's a plastic form on top of her that she's displayed in, and then there's like a little plastic shape of a body that her clothes are on. So all of these little things, along with little plastic clips, or I have a daughter, so I kind of go into her room and I take stuff. And so that's where these shapes come from originally. And it was interesting because I was really really moved by the first room when you were talking about craft and parenting and how it's like, this process, and they're so similar in that. And that craft is the way that a lot of kids, babies, humans, all of us, are introduced to the world. And I was just thinking that, why do I use so much plastic? And I was thinking, like, that's actually the way my kid was introduced to the world, was through tubes and a CPAP. And the first time that we met her, my husband's here, was through an incubator, like a vitrine, through these little handholds. So fast forward or backwards to COVID times. Our daughter was at home being homeschooled, and sometimes I would have my niece and my nephew as well. And I just was like, you guys, I need to make this piece. I had this idea, will you help me one day? And so they said yes, and no choice. And these singular pieces, this idea of weaning has this kind of forward and backward or double meaning, where when you wean, say from the breast, you're kind of losing something, and you're saying goodbye to this little loss. But weaning can also be weaned onto something. So there's this other like change in this forward movement. So during the pandemic, I was thinking of collective weaning, and what do we need to wean ourselves from? What do we need to wean ourselves onto? And also, there were so many parents, specifically a lot of mothers, who were leaning on each other during that time. As evidence, I have one kid, but I had other kids at my house. And a lot of my work is about relationality and our relationships, so this also just really reiterated that for me as well. And I talk a lot in my work about being both I'm in the middle of being a mother to this daughter and a daughter to my mother. And so this kind of shape for me was just really interesting. It kind of also invokes this idea of lineage. And oddly, with the milk, these sort of lines that were being made. I also took my first glass blowing classes during the pandemic. It's just a side note that I didn't learn how to blow glass in a traditional way. Like, I didn't put my mouth on a pipe and blow into it. I had to wear a mask, and I had a blow hose. And so it was just so funny because it was like I was like blowing through like an umbilical cord or something. And for me, as far as like this relational idea in terms of family, I feel like glass blowing is really relational, and I completely depend on the people that I make with. And it's a really interesting environment because I tend to find that people in the glass community share a lot of information and knowledge, and they show their bodies. And like parenting being an embodied practice, glass blowing is an embodied practice. You're aware of what you're doing it, you're making with your body. So, yeah, thanks. Sorry.
Thank you, Sarah. Thank you for that. I'm delighted to turn it over to Corey Ackelmire to talk about this incredible piece, The Length of 5 Years, 1,825 links.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I detest microphones, so hopefully I can navigate this. Thank you for the invitation to speak here and to be a part of this excellent exhibition. I was really excited about it. As Sarah mentioned, I am a metalsmith. I've always been interested in the way that objects can be sort of stand-ins for experiences in a way that pictures and calendars really can't duplicate. So the genesis for this work is obviously my daughter's birth, which happened a little over 5 years ago. She's almost 6 now. But of course, I did not start this right away because she was a baby, and that was very hard. It really started in the first year of her life with me wanting to get out to the studio and prove to myself that I could continue making some things while caring for this small person. So initially, I just went out to the studio to make a chain, this gold chain that would be heavy enough for her not to break. I wanted a necklace that I could wear that little baby fingers wouldn't grab and pull at, and that has worked out. She has not been able to rip it off my neck yet. But in the process of making this chain, I found that chains in general were something that I really enjoyed doing in those early years because it was a repetitive but not mindless, and I could see my progress. You know, I could do bit by bit, link by link, and look at my result at the end of however long I got out there and say, okay, I made some work today. And over time, I began to think about the metaphor of that labor and the sort of connecting one day to the next as we go through, especially a pandemic with a small child, you know, that sort of tedious labor that hopefully results in something that is, you know, greater than the sum of its parts and has a preciousness to the end result, but there's a meaning and a metaphor in the process that I went through to get there. Yeah, I'm done. Unless you have any questions. Short and to the point. Oh, did you have a question? The number of links is 1 day for every day of 5 years. So in 5 years, there are 1,825 days in 5 years. Yeah. I may keep adding to it. I don't know. I keep thinking about it. So, yeah.
Thank you, Corey. Thank you so much. Really nice segue into another artist's work in this exhibition named Annie Liu. This is a chart of every diaper feeding and breastfeeding session in the first couple of months of her child's life. Each vial has diaper hydrogel or dried breast milk in it. Annie is also the artist who has made this work over here, which is called Untitled, and it's a prototype of a suit for a non-binary pregnant person, and we'll get more into that over here, but I just wanted to show you that these two pieces are by the same artist. And in talking about the kind of accretion of time, labor that Sarah and Corey so beautifully both spoke about, these monumental paintings by Francesca Fuchs that are behind me, I think really speak to how the kind of repetitive, intimate, maybe it seems small, but really important act of feeding a child, for instance, becomes this very monumental, significant act. And I think these are a really beautiful way to talk about that analog between craftsmanship, labor, time, and the practice of caregiving. Another work by an artist from Houston, Madeline Donahue, that I'm excited to tell you about. These are 3 works: Biological Clock, Sphinx, and Ariel. And these are all portraits that Madeline made of her breastfeeding her 2 children, but also documenting her changing, growing stomach. And please peer around behind and see her reflection in the mirror, in the mirror of the screen. Madeline told me that when she was making these works, you can see the scale is pretty small, but there are many layers and slabs that are kind of built on top of one another. And I think this is a really interesting way to think about artist parents and the parameters that balancing 2 kids who are doing acrobatics over your body and nursing one but still trying to make ceramics on your lap, and thinking about how can I make a monumental sculpture and still be balancing all of those things. And I think this is a really interesting way to show that materially. Okay, so I'm going to ask us to backtrack to the beginning of this undulating table, which is a fixture that has been in every iteration of the Designing Motherhood exhibition. It was designed by Helen Chang, and it represents an umbilical cord. I think it's a really beautiful way, this kind of serpentine way to move through the trajectory of design developments, patent developments for design objects that have been designed to facilitate reproduction. Everything from early forceps to birthing stools to pessary development. Pessaries are inserted into the vagina to help with prolapsed uteruses, and you can see these early versions of that from the Mütter Museum versus a contemporary designer, Ria, which is we're showing 3 prototypes of new silicone versions. And we can see an early cesarean section receipt. It only cost $150 at one point. I think now we're approaching like $15,000. And Mothercraft, which is a manual by a British midwife, but is really thinking, do any of you watch Call of the Midwives? A couple? It's a great show, you should watch it. But they talk a lot about Mothercraft and the kind of DIY craftsmanship that comes with being a parent, whether it's sewing a maternity stretch panel into your clothing or making baby rattles. This is a piece by Marsha Lewis, who is a studio jeweler from San Diego, and she made this rattle during her first pregnancy. It's beautifully forged silver. Not everybody can make a rattle that great, but beautiful mothercraft here. We're also showing a Scottish baby box and a really beautiful gesture. This is given to every expectant parent in Scotland of what, maybe aspirational for some countries, but inside of this box, which can also be used as a sleeping vessel for children, there is everything you need for the first year of its life, including diapers, blankets, manuals. It's really beautiful. Over here, we are also re-entering milk. We have early nipple shields from the Mütter Museum. We have one in glass, one in wood, and one made out of pewter and lead, which is terrifying. And nipple shields are used to help activate the ducts and actually help the flow of milk. And I'm going to turn it over to Galen Boone, a contemporary jeweler whose nipple shields and menstrual pour are on view in this show.
Thank you, Darro. So I actually didn't know that nipple shields were a term for medical devices to help women who had given birth. until right now. So I'm like, wow, great. But I have made these beautiful, I think, a vitreous enamel, copper, chase and repoussade, nipple shields, and one is dripping beads of bone milk. And I want to say I'm feeling overcome by emotion unexpectedly. I keep holding back tears. And I spent the day walking to different museums. And even now, there's so few women artists on display, and I only saw one hint of a pregnant body. And this is an especially pregnant week for a lot of people. And I want to say thank you. And this is like such a moving show. And I've actually never been in a space that's so fucking feminine. So these nipple shields and the menstrual pour over here are from my first series of art jewelry, and it's about binary collapse. I'm a queer person. I have a lot of natural testosterone, and there's a way in which the binary gets enforced in birth, you're pink or blue, and there's a divorce in the feminized body from carrying life and being erotic. So this is two pieces of a parure of a mother archetype in a primordial queer jungle of Eden, where birth and death collapse. There's bone dripping from the nipple. There's also a series of necklaces made out of cow bone and yonic shapes, where the nerve openings are vagina openings. And using luxurious colors, textures, and materials. This is a menstrual pour worn with a loincloth made of jasper, silk, and coral with a sterling silver kind of bell to hold it against the body. And in my mind, I don't understand why, I guess it's going back to the Madonna and the whore split. And there is no life without sex, and hopefully without deep embodied pleasure. So, thank you.
Thank you, Galen. I'm delighted to also introduce another contemporary art jeweler in this same stretch of the serpentine table here, Maria Eiffe, right next to the early Egnell pump, which was developed by a Swedish designer, and the Gerber pump, and the MIT hackathon to make breast pumps suck less, and which have led to developments like the Haka breast pump and the Willow, which is transportable, so you're not tethered to a wall. We have this piece. Maria was invited to respond to the Mütter Museum's collection. It's an anthropological museum outside of Philadelphia. And what struck her most as she was visiting the collections, she was breastfeeding her first child, and she came upon the dairy room, and where they were churning butter, collecting milk, making cheese, and she was struck by the beautifully designed dairy molds that she saw. And so she transformed the phalange of the breast pump into these gorgeously filigreed dairy molds. So you can see how she 3D printed some of the versions in nylon and then cast them in brass. Over here, I'm really delighted to introduce some Houston and Gulf Coast-based collectives and startups, one of which is Milkify. Milkify is a startup that freeze-dries breast milk. It's located right here off of Allen Parkway in Houston. And their technology makes breast milk shelf-stable for up to 3 years. It is not only life-saving technology for many infant patients in the NICU, but it is also life-saving during climate crisis emergencies like hurricanes, when there's electrical outages and all of the breast milk you stored in your fridge goes bad. This is here to support families. Likewise, Birthmark Doula Collective, based in New Orleans, developed the Infant Ready Feeding Kit. Also in response to natural disaster and climate, these are distributed to mothers and allow you to continue feeding your children even during a disaster. I wanted to point out next to Galen's menstrual pour is this incredible piece by Amy Coran, who also made the chromed breast pumps in that case. These beads are made from her setting her own powdered, dehydrated breast milk into resin and creating this prayer bead-like necklace. And, you know, she's thinking a lot when we were talking about mother of pearl, preciousness, precious materials, such as breast milk. And moving over here, we're starting the section, Our Bodies Ourselves, which is thinking about everything from menstrual collection to tracking fertility to deciding that you want to opt out of reproduction. So we have a few really interesting prototypes on display, including this piece by Joshua Wasserman, which is a prototype pregnancy test for the visually impaired. It has tactile reads on it. And this piece by Renee Henry, which is called Choice, and it's kind of the silhouette of a woman's body with resin words built into it. We also have two zines here, Our Bodies Ourselves and the Plan B NOLA Reproductive Health zine. And I think these are really amazing examples. Not only is it the section title of this part of the book and the exhibition, but all of these documents were collected by groups of women who are coming together, sharing knowledge, disseminating knowledge, and this started as just handwritten and typed sheets, this book, and it's now on its 9th edition, and it's continually being added to its a living document. So I'm really delighted to turn it over to Cynthia Mulcahy to talk about her work.
Thank you. I'm right here. I'm Cynthia Mulcahy. I'm a Dallas-based artist, and I usually do pretty large. I'm a conceptual artist. I usually do large public art. But in 2020, of course, when they passed SB 8, which went into effect in 2021, artists, our antennae go up, and we're like, okay, I have to make a piece about this. We have just lost rights here, and this is really important. The title of the piece is Abortion Seed Library, and plants that have been used to terminate pregnancies have a long history in world societies. Some of the first abortion recipes, which would be to expel the fruit, are Bronze Age. So we're talking Mesopotamia. Amazing. If you look through the history, of course, when Roe was overturned, we were told it's not a part of our history. Bullshit. This is a long history going all the way back to Bronze Age, probably Iron Age. And all the plants in the library are, there's 48 vials, and they're seeds that have traditionally been used to terminate a pregnancy. And it's everything from normal culinary sage, sunflowers. You could probably go back in your garden or almost any garden, maybe half of the plants in there, because in, of course, pre-modern societies, we use plants. And in many less developed nations now, we're still using. If you look at Hawaii or some of the Pacific Island, they're using figs with honey, etc. Now, I'm not advocating that you use seeds. It's the conceptual idea that we have always controlled our reproductive lives, and we do not know men. We do not need men to help us control our reproductive lives. You wouldn't be here without us. So on the back here, you don't see it from this angle, but as you come around, it says Abortion Seed Library, and it's in gold foil stamped. I worked with a expert bookmaker in Austin to conceive the clamshell, and it has marbled paper. I often use beauty as a device to pull people in, and then you realize what this is about. But most of these seeds, I'm a farmer as well. As we know, if you're a jewelry maker, it informs your work in some way. So for maybe 15 years, I've grown about 50 kinds of herbs for chefs in Dallas. So I was already growing a lot of this stuff, and I was trying to wrap this piece up when the leaked document came out in May of 2022, and furiously trying to complete this piece, but I was still, because I wanted to grow many of the plants and then harvest the seeds and put those in the box. I also had friends that were gardeners that gave me seeds from their gardens, friends that went to Senegal and brought back seeds from the moringa tree. But again, I'm going to read a few of these real quick. So many of these are based on Greek plays, classical antiquity. They're sourced variously from ancient Babylonian recipes, 8th century Sanskrit texts, Greco-Roman literature, Middle English herbals, Inquisition, ecclesiastical proceedings, herb gardens of medieval Benedictine nuns, 12th century bishops' pharmacopoeia, early rabbinical writings, and you can read the rest, but all the way through Simon and Garfunkel lyrics, Nirvana lyrics. But again, the idea being reproductive, we have lost our rights, and it's so important for artists to resist. And especially in Texas, we're on the front lines with what's happening here. And this is the first piece I made, and I recently made a whole series of individual, what I call just abortion tea caddies. I think there's been about 10 of those. And I just finished another piece called Daddy, and it's based on, the name being funny, it's based on four fathers. The father of comedy, Aristophanes, he's a 5th century Greek playwright, a holy father, a 12th century pope who actually, before he ascended the papacy, he wrote a book. When medicine was becoming professionalized in the Middle Ages, you had a number of people, including Ben Franklin, later, who wrote what you would call like DIY manuals. In Ben Franklin's, his especially, is like how to pickle cherries, how to do your horse's hooves, how to do arithmetic, and how to terminate a pregnancy. So in colonial America, most people had the Bible, and they had Ben Franklin's book that was published in 1773. And then finally, Carl Linnaeus, he actually is the father of binomial taxation. So everything that we name, whether it's, organisms, fungi, is named after that. So all four fathers of the piece I just completed. In Daddy, same thing. There's 8 tubes of plants that have been traditionally used to avoid or terminate pregnancy. Anyway, it's just so important in Texas that we stand up to this. It hasn't been easy. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Cynthia. I'm really also delighted to share another Dallas-based artist's work. This piece is called Ours by Alicia Eggert. And this was actually developed in collaboration with Sarah Sandman and Planned Parenthood. This is a neon billboard that says, "Our bodies, our futures, our abortions," with the words overlapped and kind of blinking in succession. This piece was originally used in and activated in a performance where it traveled to all of the state houses across Texas and was documented. And we actually have lenticular postcards outside that show that Alicia signed, if you're interested. And 10% of the proceeds go to back to Planned Parenthood. So she developed this sign in response to the commission and had to make it fit in and out of a cargo van on casters to make the project actually work for the performance. So she was never able to actualize it in its full scale and in blown glass. She also had to bend it in LED so that it wasn't breaking every time they wheeled it in and out of the vehicle. So when we invited her to be in this exhibition, she was very excited to show it in the scale and the monumentality that she had originally intended when she got the commission, and in blown glass as she originally intended. So we're really so excited to be able to present this piece. Okay, so we're moving into our final gallery here, and I wanted, this is an interstitial moment right here, but it's very important, so I'm going to talk about it before we go through. These are two works by Houston-based artists. On the left is a portrait by Patty Lou Richardson of her child breastfeeding her grandchild. And her child penned the legislation in 1995 that made breastfeeding in public legal in Texas. And that legislation came to be because of a case of a woman being kicked out of a museum for breastfeeding. And lots of outcry and community collective efforts to make that a right here and across the United States. It was one of the first states in the United States to actually legalize breastfeeding. It was the fifth. And here we have a woven portrait by Tarina Frank, who's also our education director and has developed some amazing programs, including a birth story workshop led by a doula and herself making art books to share your birth story in January. But this is a document in collaboration with photographer John Runnels of her lactation doula group. 3 women in it who are all breastfeeding their children, just documenting the moment, and it's woven together in a really beautiful way. Okay, let's head into the last gallery. Okay. Please have a seat and gather over here. This gallery is called Temporary Bodies, and it is devoted to designs that facilitate evolving, growing bodies. And the term temporary bodies was coined by a fashion historian, which talks about how our bodies are constantly changing and evolving, right? It's like you could eat a burrito and your body might look different than it did earlier in the day. And also, we're constantly growing, even once we are no longer children, we're always growing and aging. So these are all designs by makers who are trying to think through our constantly evolving bodies. So here we have 2 works by Petit Pli, Ryan Marin, who's an aeronautical engineer who developed these garments using a pleated technique. They're also made out of like a ripstop material, so they're really hardy. And I'll just show you so that you can get the full effect. But they grow as the children grow. So you only need 3 garments to get a child from infancy to 10 years old. So there's also a huge ecological impact. As you know, when you have a newborn in your life, they're growing out of clothing so quickly, sometimes they don't even get to wear some of the garments you have bought for them. So this is really innovative and kind of game-changing technology here. We have, again, the early elastic panel that mothers sewed into their pajamas and other pant sets. And then we also I'm so excited to show these 2 pieces. This is by Hai-Wen Chen, she is a Taiwanese designer, and it's a prototype dress. It's pleated and it has hooks and eyes at every pleat, so you can contract it or expand it to accommodate your changing body. And we have this amazing piece by Edward McCartney, who's one of our original board members here at the Craft Center, a fantastic metalsmith artist who often changes the context of found objects. And this piece was commissioned by our board president, Judy Nyquist, who's here today, and who's been a major support for this exhibition. This jacket is made out of infant paper measuring tapes. So every child who is born, their head is measured with one of these measuring tapes at the hospital. And Edward has made a series of garments using infant measuring tapes, and really is thinking about how our bodies are these constantly changing numbers that we're always monitoring and changing. Another Texas-based artist is Cassie Arnold here. Cassie actually just completed one of the first rounds of the Ramona residency, which was started by Sarah Sudoff, and it's the first artist mother residency in Texas. So I would encourage you to apply and look into it. It's a really amazing program. Cassie's based in North Texas, and this piece is called 1 in 4, I Had a Miscarriage. It's not only an arresting kind of data visualization, which is the statistic of that 1 in 4 pregnancies are miscarriages, but it also is in the form of these tiny garments, one in this almost sheer fabric. Right alongside it, we have issues 1 through 7 of Mother Tongue magazine. Mother Tongue was one of our first project partners for this exhibition, and Natalia Rocklin, who is one of the founding editors, who is from Copenhagen but is currently based in Houston, has been a major thought partner on this show. And this is an incredible publication and collective effort. What I think is so smart about their design is that they're using graphic design and art and collaborations with artists to break away from the kind of soft, sanitized version of motherhood that we get marketed, and it's really raw and graphic and visually compelling, and it really tracks how raw and difficult motherhood and caregiving really can be. I'd also like to talk about this piece here, which is another part of Liz LaFleur's Queer Birth Project. This is the first iteration. Sorry, let me move this. We had a DJ set in here at the opening last night. Sorry about that. This is called Evolving Bodies, and it traces her partner's stomach with their growing son, Elby, in neon, and there's a fringe curtain which you're invited to walk through and experience with a printed gradient on top of it. This work is also, it was inspired by Judy Chicago's Birth Project, and it's in different stages. It's in collaboration with Katie Sobering, a sociologist, again. This was the first stage. The second stage was kind of kinship stories and family stories, which is what the Monitor is from. And again, this is a living document. It's a living research project. They have been convening, interviewing, doing oral histories with queer families across the country, and it's such important work they're doing. They also have these takeaways that say, you don't have to do it that way, or their way, or any way. You can do it this way, or that other way, or your own way. Please take one of these, and they also encourage you to take this other one, which you can make into a mobile, so you can cut out the pieces and they kind of rotate around each other. Also thinking about fringe as kind of an inherently queer and performative material that's always kinetic and moving and evolving. The last section that I will talk about is these stroller designs over here. So all of these strollers are significant for their use of expandable design elements. So the umbrella stroller on the right was developed again by an aeronautical engineer in the 50s to ameliorate the heavy, boxy, intensely difficult to travel around any space like London, Houston, really anywhere in and out of a car with a stroller. And just like an umbrella, it can collapse kind of into a column and easily be transported. A couple decades later, we have Sakai of Japan, who developed a prototype stroller called the Chummy Dream. And this stroller can be taken apart, collapsed, all of the parts. It's actually, they worked with Bridgestone to make the tires. and everything folds in and it can be carried like a suitcase. This is from 1969. And then we have a new object by two Turkish-American designers, Arzu Ozkal and Nanette Yanutzi, based in San Diego. This is called the Art Sit. It is the second prototype of a stroller for museum and art viewing spaces that places children at art viewing height. So most kids who are brought into museums, if their stroller is allowed into the museum to begin with, they're seeing the world from a very different perspective than the rest of us. And this perspective shift, it doesn't seem so very significant, but it is a complete game change in the way kids can experience art. The designers have invited parents to test this with our gallery docents, so it's available on Saturdays if you want to come back and try it for yourself. They really, really want your feedback, and it's for kids up to 5. This reading room here, I encourage you to go through some of the books. All of the books that are in this space were kind of collectively, we got book reading lists from lots of people in our community input sessions and folks at Basket Books and Mother Tongue. So peruse, enjoy, and thank you again so much for spending time with us today and experiencing Designing Motherhood. I really appreciate it. There have been so many different community partners in each city and region that it's traveled to. And they really want this show to be flexible and responsive to the spaces that it travels to and the audiences that are receiving the work. So for instance, it's on view currently at ArkDes in Stockholm, and that iteration of the show is much more focused on the Swedish history of design objects and medical history. So they've extended the checklist in kind of a different direction than ours, which is much more focused on contemporary craft design and art. But all of them are, the curatorial team is deeply generous and they are very involved. They have Michelle Miller-Fisher and Juliana Rowan-Barton are the traveling curators, and they work very closely with each venue curator to develop the checklist, develop the kind of scope, the flow of the show, all of the thematic sections, and they're very generous to share the show with us. So the exhibition design, I was conceiving of, I really wanted something that broke away from the strict rectilinear, kind of sterile, modernist paradigm of display, which is the white cube. And I wanted something that felt soft and but still radically different than that model of display presentation. So I felt like fabric was a good way of delineating space and kind of acting like a wall and a mounting mechanism that was not so static and hard. And it also kind of looks like you're getting a pap smear, right, a little bit, so. Any other questions? Thank you so much again, and please enjoy the rest of the show and come back for other public programs.